Hey everybody, welcome. We're going to get started now. Sorry about the slight delay with the technical issues, which we hope are now sorted. If some of you would be more comfortable in a wonderful room downstairs with more space, there is a spillover room downstairs, but we thought we'd try fit everybody in as much as we could. So anyway, it's my great honour to welcome everybody to the 2023 Bill Roll Lecture. This includes those who are physically present, welcome, those who are present online, and those who are on catch-up, watching this recording later on. This year's lecture is titled The Science of Channeling, and it's going to be given by Dr. Helané Wahbeh, and she is going to be formally introduced a little bit later by my colleague, Dr. Glazier. We're going to have a couple of introductions before we get to the main event, including Olivia Parker as well. Oh dear. But for now, I'd like to thank our speaker in advance for visiting us today. And I'm very excited to learn more about this fascinating area of research that's going on at IONS out in California. So Helané is joining us today from California. So before we begin, I want to start off by remembering Dr. William or Bill Roll. So this lecture series is named in honor of Dr. Roll. And Dr. Roll passed away in 2012. That was just a year after I started here at West Georgia. And this was the year of the inaugural Bill Roll lecture that started in the fall of 2012. And I initiated that series. And since that time, we've invited key researchers from around the world in parapsychology and consciousness studies to present a lecture that's designed for the university community and interested members of the public. So we really want to sort of get the word out there. Tonight's lecture is actually going to be the 10th lecture in the series. We've had 2 years, including 2020, when this didn't happen. So this is the 10th one. Our goal with the lecture series is to promote a fascinating yet still neglected topic of study. So the topic of parapsychology, the discipline of parapsychology, is the academic discipline that studies experiences that challenge the ways in which the mind is assumed to work. So this is according to mainstream ideas about reality and consciousness. And so parapsychologists study all sorts of interesting experiences, including extrasensory perception, survival of human consciousness after death, and anomalous interactions between mind and matter. These experiences are studied from multiple perspectives, including field research, laboratory experiments, surveys, and studies that explore people's experiences and how they make sense of them. And we do all of that here at West Georgia. Dr. Roll was born in Bremen, not our Bremen, but the one in Germany. He had a lifelong interest in consciousness and exceptional human experiences. And his own interests in parapsychology were actually inspired by an out-of-body experience that he had when he was 16 years of age. And this inspired him on his academic journey that took him to the UK, to Oxford University, and then later to the United States. And in the States, he found his way to the Duke Parapsychology Lab, which is really where, I suppose, modern parapsychology originated. And that's before he started up the Psychical Research Foundation, or PRF. He did a lot of things in his lifetime. I'm not going to mention everything today, but he was very, very prominent in the field of parapsychology. So why West Georgia? Why are we talking about Dr. Roll here? Well, he was here. Dr. Roll was on the faculty in the early 1980s until his retirement in 2008. And he's well known for his systematic research into haunting cases and poltergeist cases in particular, as well as other things too, including the psychomantium, which we're actually replicating here at the moment where we have been. Got a little lab down there where we've been studying the creation of ghosts, and Dr. Roll did that too. So he has several famous cases, including the Seaford and Columbus cases, and some of those records are in special collections, and Lynn's going to talk to us about that in a few moments. So Dr. Roll is survived by his wife, Lydia, and his children, Lise, Life, Bill, and his grandchildren. I have to really focus on the life because my son has a similar name, but it's pronounced differently. So while I have the mic, I also want to share a little bit about parapsychology and the study of exceptional human experiences here at the University of West Georgia in March 2023. Parapsychology classes are taught at all 3 levels here, undergraduate, master's, and the doctoral level. So also we have a healthy research agenda. In 2020, we launched an official research group called the Exceptional Experiences Research Lab, otherwise known as the EERL. And this extends beyond Carrollton as my co-founder, Dr. Mitchell, continues to be involved from the California Institute of Integral Studies. So we're sort of spreading. Dr. Jake Glazier is a co-member, as is Dr. Mackenzie Smith in sociology, who was doing earlier. And then we also have several undergrads and graduate students, many of whom are here tonight, and some of them have graduated and have come back. And I think that sort of carries over into community members too. But not who are in the ERL, but who are interested. We have a nice, albeit small, research space where I recently ran a study on ghosts. We're currently working on several projects, including, not exclusively, but one on psychometry, one on folklore, local folklore, one on ESP and floating. We're going to be doing new things soon on aphantasia and exceptional experiences, and I'm meant to do this. And on connection to nature and extrasensory perception and empathy. So this is Maya, who is a graduate now, but is also a member of the lab. And this is like from some past research. And this is what I meant to have up when I was talking about Dr. Roll. There we go. So as I said before, we also do have another area on campus, another location where exceptional experiences feature. And I want to introduce Lynn Olivieri Parker, who is the head of special collections at the University of West Georgia. Special collections are co-sponsoring our event this evening, and we're really grateful for their support. So I'm going to hand over now to Lynn, who's going to talk to us for a few moments about special collections, and in particular the human consciousness collection. So thank you for being here.
I have a little Nelson dust on me from that chair, but that's special. I know that's special. Good evening. My name is Lynn Olivier Parker, and I have the honor and pleasure of serving as head of special collections in Ingram Library, located here on the beautiful campus of the University of West Georgia. So thank you very much to Dr. Jake Glazier and to the rest of the organizing committee for inviting me to give some brief remarks. I'd like to extend thanks to a GRA, a graduate research assistant in Special Collections, Elizabeth, for helping. And one of the members of the Bill Roll Lecture Committee is Taylor Robinson, a psychology master's degree student. Where are you? There you are. Who also works as a GRA in Special Collections. What great experiential learning opportunity for Taylor and for Elizabeth all around. And we especially appreciate their contributions to UWG. The reason I'm speaking briefly here to you all is because of special collections. The library holds scarce and valuable materials like rare books, rare serials, other rare printed materials like posters, flyers, etc., and archives. These collections cover university history, regional history and culture, Georgia politics and politicians, and humanistic psychology and human consciousness studies. The humanistic psychology and human consciousness collections were founded to support the unique psychology academic program here at this university. The complementary primary research collections in Ingram Library are likewise to the program deep, distinctive, and I would assert the best in North America. A signature archive in this area are the papers of Bill Roll. We call it the William T. Roll papers because that's the name he published under. So we use the most common published format, very library nerdy of us. The Bill Roll papers measure out to over 224 boxes and are rich with haunting and poltergeist case files, experimental files that he ran of different experiments, reports, topical files, correspondence, and manuscripts for his articles and books. The papers demonstrate the prowess of his intellect, the spectrum of his connections, and from a bird's eye view, provide insight into both American and global attention to psychic phenomenon, particularly from the late 1950s to the 2000s. A sampling of his papers was displayed downstairs earlier this evening, and I'll just briefly describe some of the items that were out on the table. A box of cassette tapes with recordings from his cases, which captured audio of odd noises and things like that, objects being moved around the room, photographs of Bill Roll, drawings that he made in 1977, a 1981 report submitted to the Atlanta Police Commissioner about an experiment that he ran with psychics, which gathered data and summarized psychic impressions of who the murderer might be and associated details, which was revolutionary, actually. A manuscript draft of his foreword to a book by Scott Rogo, a 1994 statement on Roll's vision for the field of psychology, an issue of Theta, which was a publication of the Psychical Research Foundation, results of a psi experiment with a medium. He ran a number of those kind of experiments, which are particularly relevant to Dr. Wahbeh's talk tonight. And a box of rare cereals from Parapsychological Association in South Africa, which to me exemplifies Roll's deliberate collection of parapsychological research worldwide. So Bill Roll was not just a researcher, an author, and a professor in the field of parapsychology, plumbing the possibilities of human consciousness and our relationships, astroking around relationships to ourselves, others, objects, our long bodies, extensions of our long bodies, the world around us and the cosmos, but also he collected materials. His well-organized papers and his library of materials, particularly those international serials published in the languages from those countries, are an invaluable source for not only documenting psychology, but human culture. His papers and his library have been used by students, scholars, members of the public, and as you may have seen, have appeared on numerous television shows, in documentaries, and in books. And it's my honor to sort of facilitate all that in special collections as a librarian. The importance of an academic institution like UWG in collecting, preserving, and providing public access to these rare and one-of-a-kind materials is that it not only provides a robust and extensive research source for academicians, but it documents human experiences. Worldwide, people have life-altering events and experience life-altering phenomena, like near-death experiences, communications from deceased loved ones, and premonitions. Can you imagine if these very real and very human experiences were bleached from the record of our human history? And that is why it is so important that we document and collect these materials. And so that is the work of libraries and archives, to preserve and to share these research materials for you, for anyone, and for maybe most importantly, the future. These primary source materials are here to be used, to be browsed, explored, laughed over, cried over, photographed, memed, that's happened, and shared. Because these books and archives hold meaning to document life in all of its histories and mysteries. So cheers to Bill Roll for his conscientious effort to share this research with you. And cheers to his wonderful family and friends. And cheers to Dr. Wahbeh for her amazing research. And cheers to you for engaging in the exploration of life and the exploration of meaning. So I'd love to speak with any of you about special collections and to set up an exploratory research appointment for you. Please feel welcome to contact me at special@westga.edu. Thank you all.
Thank you, Glenn. We appreciate having you here in the support of Special Collections as well. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Jacob Blazier. I'm working with Christine to put on the event this evening. It's really great to have you. I want to thank Dr. Simmons Moore for opening the event this evening and for helping to carry forward the legacy of parapsychological research here at the University of West Georgia. Again, a very special thank you to Blynn Olivieri Parker, head of Ingram Library Special Collection, for her continued support of the Bill Roll Lecture and the really excellent work that she just got done detailing for us, that she does to help make UWG an internationally known repository for literature on consciousness, exceptional experiences, and parapsychology. I also want to thank each one of you, the audience members on Zoom, joining virtually, and you all here in person for helping make this event possible, for supporting this forum. All right, it is my honor to introduce the speaker of the event tonight, Dr. Helané Wahbeh. She will present the 2023 Bill Roll Lecture. Dr. Wahbeh is the Director of Research at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, or IONS for short. She's also an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Neurology at Oregon Health and Science University. And she's president of the Parapsychological Association, or the PA, which is sort of one of the main institutions for parapsychology. Dr. Wahbeh clinically trained as a naturopathic physician and a research trained with a master's of clinical research and 2 postdoctoral research fellowships. She's published and spoken internationally about her studies on complementary and alternative medicine, on body-mind medicine, extended human capacities, stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, and their relationship to physiology, health, and healing. Dr. Wahbeh is especially known for her research around and noetic approach to channeling, which she's going to detail in tonight's lecture. Her presentation is entitled The Science of Channeling. Therein, she will detail the ongoing work at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS. IONS is a research center and a direct experience laboratory that has been at the forefront of the scientific investigation of consciousness for more than 50 years. Founded by astronaut Edgar Mitchell, the mission of IONS is to reveal the interconnected nature of reality through scientific exploration and personal discovery, both. Building on decades of previous work others have done at IONS and elsewhere, Dr. Wahbeh organized the IONS Channeling Research Program. Channeling has been recorded throughout written history, from the Delphi Oracle in Greece to various ancient traditions in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism. However, channeling practices are not just a thing of history. Surveys show us, research shows us that channeling is ubiquitous globally. Channeling is a universal human experience. And the IONS Channeling Research Program aims to answer 6 research questions. All right. The first, what do we know from the published and unpublished resources about channeling? Number 2, how common is channeling, or what are its characteristics? Number 3, how does channeling work? Number 4, are there defining characteristics of someone who channels easily? Number 5, can we verify the information? And number 6, is the content useful? Dr. Wahbeh will share the progress IONS has made in answering these crucial questions. As part of the program, a series of studies were conducted on what's called the noetic signature. Dr. Wahbeh will also discuss these studies, what the noetic signature means, and the 12 characteristics that define it. Just a brief note, if you are on Zoom, just a friendly reminder to please make sure that you mute yourselves so that we can hear the lecture okay here in person for the duration of the presentation. Dr. Wahbeh will present for approximately 45 minutes, after which she will take questions from both the virtual and the in-person audience. So everybody, please join me in welcoming the speaker of the 2023 Bill Roll Lecture, Dr. Helané Wahbeh.
Thank you so much, Dr. Glazier. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you okay. Yeah, I'm just gonna give me just a second here.
Okay. I'll just offer my deep, deep gratitude to you, to Dr. Simmons-Moore, to the entire University of West Georgia team for this incredible invitation. I was so deeply honored when I received this invitation.
Thank you. No, she's right here. Where'd she go?
Okay.
All right, there we go. So it's okay. All right, I think we can see you now. All right.
Okay, great.
Dr. Wahbeh, can you say something so we can see if you come up?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. We're just having trouble getting you to show up on the screen.
Okay, I do see my slides there, which is nice that that's working.
How do I know, how do I, oh, there we go. Okay. All right, there we go. All right, thank you so much. All right, sorry about that. Okay.
Great, so now you can see my face. Thank you so much again for this wonderful opportunity, this invitation. I'm so deeply grateful to be here with all of you on this incredible occasion of honoring Bill Roll. Now, I'm just thrilled to hear about the work that's happening in your department and also the archives. The news about these incredible efforts have definitely spread throughout the parapsychology community and beyond. And I'm really grateful that you are holding space for that work to be done because it is absolutely essential. So Dr. Glazier, I'm hoping you can make it so that I can still have my slides show up. Are you working on that? Okay, there it goes.
Does that look okay? Yes. All right.
Okay, so
say it's okay. All right.
Okay, great. So you see the little me and my slides right there.
All right. Dr. Wahbeh, I'm gonna mute us. Okay.
Okay.
So, and for the duration, and then I'll come up here and I'll unmute.
Sounds great. Okay, wonderful. So yes, deep gratitude. And I'm so honored to be honoring Bill Roll through this presentation. I can only aspire to his depth and breadth of impact that he had on the parapsychology field. So it is just incredible to be offering this lecture to you today in his honor. So you heard from Dr. Glazier's introduction of me that I have this academic background. It's a clinical background as well. I have multiple research, postdoctoral fellowships focused on clinical research. So in hearing that, you might wonder, well, how the heck did this person start working on channeling? Well, what you don't know from that bio is that I actually, like Dr. Roll, had a personal experience from a very young age, and that I actually come from a long line of what's called trance channelers. My mother, my grandmother, my uncle, every member of my mother's side of the family has some type of channeling ability. And I'll describe a little bit about what I mean by channeling in a little bit. So I have this long history of personal experience. I went to my grandparents' house at 10 years old for my first spiritualist-like type seance, where I saw my uncle and grandmother go into this trance channeling state, and that deeply affected my worldview. Now, in academia and with my clinical background, etc., this wasn't really something that I could actually felt comfortable talking about. And I basically was in the channeling closet, if you will, going about my business, moving through my career. And it was only when I learned about IONS, or the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and joined their team, was I able to really bring together my clinical professional background with my personal background to be able to study this thing called channeling that we'll get into. So Dr. Glaser mentioned this a little bit, but IONS was founded by Edgar Mitchell, who was an Apollo 14 astronaut. And he was actually the 6th person to walk on the moon. He had a job to do on the moon, and he returned. He was in his capsule on his way back to Earth, and the capsule was spinning in 360 degrees, and he was seeing the Earth, the stars, the sun, the moon, and it was just rotating. And he went into this incredibly profound, transcendent experience where he felt at one with everything around him, and that everything was one with him. And so as an engineer, this was very bizarre to him, but affected him so deeply that when he returned to Earth, he said, I want to know what that is. I want to figure that out. So he founded IONS in 1973. We're celebrating our 50th year anniversary today. And Dr. Glaser mentioned the mission of IONS. We also have what we call our guiding hypothesis. And that's that everything is interconnected, and that embodying that awareness reveals information and energy, not limited by our conventional notions of time and space, which in turn can profoundly amplify transformation, innovation, and well-being. And so today I'm going to be really focused in on this piece of revealing information and energy, not limited by space and time. And so Dr. Glaser gave a little bit of background on the IONS channeling research program. It just felt very natural to me when I came to IONS and figuring out what I wanted to focus on to do that work. Of course, IONS has done previous work around this, and researchers around the world have done work in this area for over 150 years. This has been formally studied in parapsychology. And I'm just freshening it up, if you will, and giving it a new structure to continue that work. So those 6 questions were mentioned, and I'll highlight them again here. What do we know and not know, especially in terms of how common channeling is? What are its characteristics? How does channeling work? What makes a channel a channel? Can we verify the information? And is the content useful? We won't have time to go through each one of these today, but I'd like to touch on a few of them and share with you what we've learned. So I'd like to first start with what I mean by channeling, because many of you in the audience might have different definitions for what you ascribe to that term. So I really use a very broad definition of channeling, and I define it as this process of revealing information and energy not limited by our conventional notions of space and time, that can appear receptive or expressive. And we'll dive into that a little bit more. I also propose that this is an innate capacity of all humans, that all humans can channel in some way. And that the way that people channel is incredibly diverse. And we see a huge spectrum of channeling experiences, from intuition, gut hunches that just about everyone could say that they've experienced at one time or another, all the way to more rare experiences like trance channeling or mediumship, and everything in between, knowing the future, mind-to-mind impressions, etc. So let's dive into the first of these questions regarding how common is channeling. So considering the taboos that are related to them, you'd think that channeling was actually quite rare. I would do talks about this when I first started at IONS, and people would invariably come up to me afterwards and say, you know, thank you so much for sharing about this. I had this experience, but I haven't told anyone. I don't feel comfortable telling anyone. And, you know, people were afraid to talk about their channeling experiences. So for some reason, it's perceived to be rare. However, in fact, channeling is very common. There have been numerous studies that have been done around the world. And just to orient you to the slide, along the bottom, we have the year that the survey was done. And on the left side, we have the prevalence, which is the percentage of the people polled who endorsed the specific experience. And then you see the name of the country next to each symbol, and each symbol represents a different channeling experience, like precognition, which is knowing the future, or out-of-body experiences, etc. So you see there's quite a range from a few percent down here in this close to 2,000 study, all the way up to 71%. There's quite a bit of variability. And for the most part, it's in this middle range, which is not rare. In fact, it is quite common. Recently, we did our own survey around this, and we asked about 900 people who were part of 3 groups: scientists and engineers, the general public, and IONS members, who we called enthusiasts. And we hypothesized that the scientists and engineers would have less experiences, just because there were so many taboos in academia that we envisioned it would be much lower for them. We asked them about 25 different channeling experiences, and these percentages are incredible. So 94% of the general population endorsed at least one of these 25 items. It was 93% for scientists, 99% for enthusiasts. And I saw those results. I said, something's not quite right here. Let's go back and look at those questions. And we pulled out the ones that people could potentially construe as traditional items. For example, we had a question about feeling other people's emotions. So you can feel that in sort of normal human empathy, but there's also a parapsychological aspect of that, of actually feeling another person's emotions. So we took 5 of those items out, and it was still over 85% across the board. And that the scientists and engineers had very similar results to the general population. So that was quite incredible to us, but also supported the literature demonstrating that this is ubiquitous in humanity. People have these experiences, and they are very common. You can dive more deeply into this specific survey in this paper that we had published in Explore. And so just to highlight this again, looking at these numbers in perspective. If you look at the World Health Organization's model for defining how rare or common a specific disease is, they have very common at 10%. And the lowest value in our study was 1% for pyrokinesis, which is very rare and is essentially controlling fire. And only 4 of the 25 experiences that we looked at had less than 10%. So yes, channeling experiences are incredibly common. So this is a beautiful slide here for me to take a deep breath and to prime you that we're going to move on to another question. So the next question I want to touch on is, what are its characteristics? I mentioned that I'm proposing that channeling is innate to all of us, that there is quite a bit of variability in how it shows up for people. And we call this at IONS your unique noetic signature. So the way that your channeling is expressed is unique to you. It's like a fingerprint or this beautiful, unique snowflake. And you can liken this to some sort of personality types like the Myers-Briggs. And so this is how we're thinking about this. And we wanted to formally study the different unique characteristics of people to see if we could define them in some way, see how they showed up in various populations. Were they traits in that they just stayed constant, or were they changeable over time if people took classes or practiced, etc.? So we embarked on this journey to create what we called the Noetic Signature Inventory. And this program had multiple phases. The first phase was to basically start from scratch. Rather than sticking to the terms that have been used in parapsychology, we wanted to essentially try to wipe the slate clean and ask people to describe their subjective experiences in as much detail as possible. Then we took all of that data and did a thematic analysis and pulled out various themes that led to the generation of an inventory that had items based on those themes. We did a factor analysis to pull out the different pieces that essentially explain the variability of that data. And then we administered the final version to validate the inventory. So I'm just going to highlight a few aspects of this project that we've been working on. So the first qualitative study, we asked people, please describe in as much detail as possible how you access information not limited to our conventional notions of time and space. And we repeated that for accessing energy, expressing information, and expressing energy. Now, this was essentially, from our perspective, asking the same question from a different lens. And we pooled all the text from these 4 questions when we did our thematic analysis. So we took all that data, we did a qualitative analysis, and we found a number of major themes that arose from that data. The first was around how people engaged in the process, how they engaged to get into a state where they felt like they were accessing this information and energy. Another theme was ways of knowing. We also had ways of affecting, ways of expressing what they learned. We also saw a number of descriptions of the field. And then there was also a lot about the type of information that people were receiving, whether it was about the future or the past or other people, etc. So I'd like to share with you a little bit about this theme of ways of engagement. So what we noticed was that there were two major categories of how people engaged. One was intentional and the other was unintentional. So if you look at the intentional processes, that was further split into two types. One was internally focused. For example, many people talked about connecting to some force that was greater than their individual self. They talked about setting an intention or asking or praying. Meditation was mentioned quite a bit, along with other specific altered states like remote viewing or astral projection, shamanic journey work, and breath work was commonly mentioned as well. So these were all internal processes that people engaged in to access this channeling state. There were also a number of intentional external practices. People talked about being in nature. They talked about various traditions and rituals that they would engage in, like drumming, rattles, music, dancing. Many people also talked about using tools like pendulums or sigils, etc. Taking substances like psychedelics that induced altered states of consciousness. So these were all intentional pieces that people did to get into that state. Then we also had a number of people who talked about spontaneous or unintentional channeling experiences. This one participant said, I experience a sense of knowing, which comes spontaneously and kind of takes me by surprise. There's absolutely no connection to any other thought or information. It doesn't seem logical, but always turns out to be right. Most of this kind of information is really related to people, as I already have so much information about them in the moment I meet them. It is like I could see right through them into their soul. And so, this is beyond sort of cognitive or traditional ways of knowing. It's meeting someone, shaking their hand perhaps, and getting information about them that you couldn't possibly know otherwise, and often have it verified from them after you begin speaking with them. Other spontaneous anecdotes were related to moments of danger. There were so many descriptions of people who were protected in some way. For example, one person spoke of being at a stoplight and the light was red and the light turned green and they were about to accelerate, but they heard a loud, strong voice saying, stop. So they stopped, they didn't move forward. And then immediately a huge 18-wheeler truck had ran the red light on the other side of the intersection and would have hit them if they had moved forward. So there were multiple interesting anecdotes about this protection from dangerous situations. So that was this ways of engaging theme from this qualitative analysis. So we ended up with actually 350 themes and sub-themes from looking at all of this data. And we took each of those and created items for them. So instead of it being a qualitative analysis, we were going to ask people just to endorse if each of these items were true or not true. Actually, we had it on a scale of agree to disagree. And so we had 5 questions for each theme. We reviewed this large 350 question inventory and reduced it to 175 items. So because of course, people don't want to do a questionnaire that is that long. So we took the results of this 175 version and that we administered that to over 500 people. And we did something called a factor analysis, which attempts to pull out the items that explain the most variability. And through that process, we ended up with an inventory that had 44 items and had 4 different factors or characteristics, if you will, that described the data. And there were 3 to 10 items for each characteristic. So the 12 characteristics that we found, I'm going to go through them quickly now, and then I'll describe them in more detail in the subsequent slides. The first was intuition, and it came in 3 flavors: knowing through emotions, feeling in the body, and knowing mentally. Then we had embodied sensations, physical sensations from other people, inner knowing through touch, inner voice, apparent communication with non-physical beings, knowing the future, knowing others' minds, knowing through dreams, affecting your personal world, visualizing to access or affect, and finally healing. So I'll dive into these a little bit more deeply, but I have this picture of all these people to just remind us of the incredible variability and uniqueness of the expression of our channeling capacities. So the first one, intuition, is really about general inner knowing. And it showed up in 3 different subcategories. The first was through emotions. So this is where people feel like they're actually feeling another person's emotions. And this, like I mentioned earlier, goes beyond the traditional human empathy. So I might see someone crying and feel sad for them because I can see them crying. So that might be normal empathy. And yet clear empathy is a little bit different. So you imagine, people arguing in a room and someone entering that room and, not getting any visual or auditory cues, but just feeling the anxiety or tension or anger, etc. The second subcategory of this was feeling in the body. So people would often say, I just feel it. I just have this gut feeling or hunch that it is true. And historically, this has been called clairsentience or clear feeling. And so this is another aspect of this general inner knowing, if you will. The other very common aspect was knowing mentally, or people would say, I just know it. And historically, this is called claircognizance. People would talk about getting downloads of information. Like when you meet someone, this download of information comes where you just know that it's true, or, you're having to make a decision and you're like, I just know I need to choose this way. I don't know how or why, but I just know that it's true. So that was the general intuition and how those different nuances of that showed up. And I invite you, as I go through these, to actually think about yourself. And if you've actually experienced any of these in your own life, and if so, are some stronger than others? And how does it show up for you? So the next characteristic was embodied sensations. And these are very specific sensations that arise when you're getting noetic information. And I should clarify here what noetic actually means. Noetic is Greek, coming from the Greek noesis, which means inner knowing. So sometimes we include that word interchangeably for inner knowing. So for this embodied sensations one, it's about specific sensations. So this is very strong for me. Like I'll get goosebumps on my skin when there is a truth that's arising for me, or if I'm needing to make a decision and I'm thinking about one and I get goosebumps all over my body, that to me is a sign, okay, go that way. And this specific sensations is different than what I just described under the general intuition, because it is a very particular sensation. So one of our participants said, I know when I have a spirit around me because I get a tingling sensation between my left hip and knee. So that's a very specific sensation that cues them that they're getting channeled or noetic information. The next characteristic is physical sensations from other people. Now, this is physical sensations that you feel in your body, but they aren't necessarily your own. And you might think, well, how does that work? So there were many anecdotes of people describing picking up on other people's pain or suffering or just other sensations. There was one story of a person who met up with their friend. They got into their car. They were going to go to the coffee shop or something together. And the person was feeling perfectly fine. But then all of a sudden, their left knee started hurting them very intensely. And they didn't know why. And, they didn't say anything about it. And then through the course of the conversation, their friend shared with them that they were having this intense left knee pain. And often, as soon as people realize that it's not their own pain or sensation, it will often dissipate. So this is the characteristic of physical sensations from other people. Another characteristic is inner knowing through touch. Historically, this is called psychometry, and people can put an object in their hands and gain a great deal of information from it that they couldn't possibly know in other ways. The next characteristic is inner voice. So I mentioned about people being at the stoplight and hearing the word stop and not moving forward. There's also a interesting story documented from Socrates' life, who was walking down a road with some friends and heard a clear internal message to not go down that road anymore. And so he moved off. His friends didn't join him. And, they just dismissed what he was saying. And all of a sudden, this herd of wild boars come barreling down the road and running into their friends and harming them. But he was safe, untouched, because he listened to that inner voice. There is numerous stories of this inner voice, historically known as clairaudience. And there's actually quite a bit of resurgence of interest in studying this from many mental health researchers, including a group at Yale that is doing a large research study on normalizing these clear inner messages that are not pathological in any way, but can actually support people. So that's a really interesting growing research area. The next characteristic is apparent communication with non-physical beings. And so this relates to what's called mental mediumship. So in mental mediumship, people believe that they can communicate to deceased humans or other non-physical beings, and that they essentially act like translators, if you will, receiving messages from the other side and then communicating it to their sitters. Trans-channeling, which I mentioned earlier and runs in my family, is a little bit different in that the channeler believes that they are acting as a vehicle for a non-physical being to communicate through them. They often describe it as stepping aside, and for the non-physical being actually uses their voice, uses their body to communicate. So mental mediums may be more of a translator, and the trans-channeler may be more of an instrument, if you will. There's also extensive research done on what's called after-death communication. And these are various phenomenon that people associate with communication from their loved ones or others from the other side. Now, there's incredible rigorous research done on mental mediumship, even using triple-blind laboratory studies demonstrating that mediums can obtain verifiable information about deceased humans. But many of you may know that there's quite a bit of controversy about exactly what the source is of this information. Is it really separate personality that is non-physical? Is it some type of other psi phenomenon like telepathy or clairvoyance? I don't think we really have the means to definitively answer that right now, but this is clearly a phenomenon that is experienced and has demonstrated benefit for the grieving process, for creating meaning and improved quality of life in people's lives, and absolutely feel that this is worth exploring. Until the time when we can actually definitively know, I look forward to that day. The next characteristic is knowing the future, or precognition. This is basically just knowing something that's going to happen in the future, usually having that verified, and you couldn't possibly know that that was going to happen. The next characteristic is knowing other minds, or otherwise known as telepathy. And this is often just mental impressions that people can pick up from others. Often some people will, we see this in superhero movie, Marvel movies, etc., where there's a, red light zapping out of people's eyes to go to the other person. We're pretty sure that it doesn't work in the force-like way, but it is clear that we've seen in laboratory studies growing positive evidence that people can, in fact, detect mental impressions from other people. And we just received a grant with Dr. Simmons-Moore and other esteemed colleagues to test this in a protocol called the Gansfeld protocol that is basically putting people into this heterogeneous sensory state where, what they're hearing and seeing is exactly the same, with the intention that perhaps allows more psychic information to come through. So I'm looking forward to working on that project and seeing what we find. The next characteristic was about knowing through dreams. So many people don't get channeled information during their waking hours, but actually while they're asleep. And this has also been tested in the laboratory. There have been numerous laboratory studies over decades that show that people have actually picked up mental impressions and other information through their dreaming life, sleeping time. And so this was quite fascinating to me that this showed up as a characteristic, because it's not a phenomenon per se, but it is this kind of specific state of being where it comes up more than in other times. And it's true for the next characteristic, which is affecting your personal world. This was about decision-making and self-healing and awareness and introspection. And, I was thinking, well, that's not really a specific phenomena per se, but this aspect of people using channeling in this way explained a great deal of the variability. It was so strong that it arose as its own characteristic. And because we are really doing this in a data-driven way, I felt compelled to keep it in there as a characteristic. We're getting close. So this is visualizing to access or affect. And this includes accessing information like remote viewing or clairvoyance, being able to know information from distant places, and also affecting. So manifestation, people used words like manifestation. This also applies to psychokinesis, micro psychokinesis, like people do with random number generators, other probabilistic systems that you can only see the effects with statistics, or macro psychokinesis, mind over matter, where you can actually see it, spoon bending or other various less available ways of seeing how our intention affects the physical world. And then there's biopsychokinesis, where people are applying intention to, say, other people or cells or plants, and see significant differences when people are intending versus not intending. So there has been extensive research on both of these areas. And I was pretty amazed that all of these showed up in one characteristic. And when I started reflecting on it, I guess you can think of it, the core of it, as this imagining, visualizing, seeing as reality what you want. And then it either shows up in a receptive way or you are affecting something in an expressive way. So I'm looking forward to learning more about this specific characteristic and how it morphs and changes over time with people. So just a point here about specifically about the remote viewing, there have been incredible studies done about remote viewing. It's really wonderful because you can use it in a very practical way. So there was the Stargate military program that many of you may know about, where they trained soldiers in remote viewing, and they had multiple, I think it was over 500 separate actionable missions that they took based on the information these soldiers were getting through remote viewing, which is incredible in my mind. They also have used remote viewing for predicting stock markets, sporting outcomes, finding archaeological sites. And I know that some people are even using it covertly. Some law enforcement people are using remote viewers to help them with difficult cases of missing persons, etc., which is quite incredible. And then to speak to the affecting, just to give you an example, one of the participants had it in their mind that they wanted to stop their electric meter. They were tired of paying their electric bill and experimented to try to intend for their electric meter to stop turning. So they did that, and it in fact stopped turning, and they weren't getting electrical bills for about 2 months. And then their guilt set in for having done this. And they said, okay, I'm intending for the meter to turn on again. And the meter started turning on again. So this is an example from our qualitative data that was quite remarkable. So the final noetic signature characteristic is healing. And this is people who can heal others, heal themselves, etc. We know there's quite a bit of laboratory information about how people's positive intention influences all of these things. And energy medicine techniques like therapeutic touch and Reiki have also been shown to positively affect numerous conditions like pain, cancer, mental health symptoms, and hypertension. So the take-home message of this whole noetic signature process is that these experiences are incredibly common, and they are individual, and they're incredibly diverse. And there's not one way that's better than the other way. And I'm really supporting this idea that we all honor our characteristics individually and collectively as well. So if you want to learn more information about this, we have a couple papers that we've published on it. And we also have the noetic signature available if you'd like to check it out at nsi.noetic.org. So here's another breathing space. I'm going to change gears now to very quickly talk about, can we verify the information? I talked a little bit as we were going through those different characteristics about the number of studies and growing evidence for verifying the information we get through channeling. But I just wanted to touch on one study we just finished on telepathy, specifically telephone telepathy. So no one probably knows what this thing is anymore. It looks like more like this. And this work is building on the work of Rupert Sheldrake, who found that people could guess who was calling them in controlled trials. They found that, you know, if people were calling, that the receiver could guess who was calling them at a level greater than chance. And so we were really curious how this worked. Does the person know that they were calling because they were sensing the future or precognition? Or did they know who was calling because the person calling them was thinking about them, or, you know, picking up their mental impressions? And perhaps precognition and telepathy are just different aspects of the same phenomenon. So Rupert Sheldrake did one study where he looked at this, and he found that telepathy was actually the mechanism in that specific study for how it was working. And I'm running out of time, so I'm going to kind of go a little bit more quickly here, and so we can have plenty of time for questions. So we did this study where we had a group of 3 people who were going to be called, and we're going to guess who they were going to be connected to. One aspect of this study was to look at the genetic relationship and if that affected how accurate they were. Also, we looked at the physical distance that they were from each other, their emotional closeness, how often they normally talk to each other. And we had each group complete 12 trials or 12 calls. So what we would do, the people would register, and then each time a call would start, they'd get randomized to either go through path A or path B. And path A was the precognitive model. It meant that the people are connected and they were randomly selected who they were going to get paired to after they made their guesses for who was calling them. Path B was a telepathic model. There were only 2 people being connected, and one person was directed to direct their intentions. You're gonna be calling Susie. Think about Susie. Think about Susie. Think about Susie. And then the call was connected. So what we found was that, yes, people were accurately able to guess who was calling them above chance. We found that the telepathy path was more accurate than the precognition path. So that intention matters. You thinking about that person actually makes a difference. We didn't really see any difference in the genetic relationships or in physical distance. Emotional closeness was a little bit mixed, and the communication frequency, that was a predictor of accuracy. So finally, I want to just touch a little bit on this next question of what makes a channel a channel. So I already mentioned that about my proposal that this is an innate capacity, but we have yet to definitively prove that. One thing that is really clear is that belief matters. So if I believe in channeling and I believe that I can do channeling, I'll have more channeling experiences and do well on laboratory tests. And it's the same with meditation. Meditation is actually one of the strongest predictors for the same, having more channeling experiences and doing well on tasks. I imagine, often meditators go into this transcendent oneness state where they feel greater than themselves. Perhaps that allows them to tap into broader information. And they also do a lot of mental focus and attention training, which may support the process. Another common trend is altered states of consciousness. Regardless of how you get there, being in an altered state than our normal running around in our daily lives supports channeling experiences. People also talk about how this potentially runs in families. So anecdotally, people will talk about that. I know it's true in my life. There's been very few studies that have formally looked at this. We did one interesting study where we had 14 high functioning psychics and 10 age, gender, race match controls. And we found the difference in this TNRC18 in the non-coding region of that gene, which is on chromosome 7. It's actually highly expressed throughout the brain and has multiple functions. What's fascinating is that this non-coding region, it's actually the original form of that, and it's present in over 90% of the people in these large global genomic databases. So the take-home message of this study at a very preliminary level is that maybe a low-grade psychic ability is actually quite widespread. So this is very early pilot study, so I'm looking forward to continuing our work on that. So in terms of the genetic component, like I mentioned, there's lots of anecdotal evidence, there's some surveys. There's one pedigree analysis that was done by another researcher. And we did the pilot study that I just talked to you about. We're currently doing a genetic data sharing study where people contribute their 23andMe and Ancestry.com scores, and then we're gonna do some analysis on that. And we're looking forward to doing some future studies as well. We have an ongoing study with Columbia looking at the brain and the structure of the brain and how that relates to channeling experiences. I actually have a meeting with my collaborators tomorrow so that we can begin analyzing that, because we have enough cases now to be able to start looking at this. And then finally, I just want to touch on this idea of, maybe everyone can learn how to do channeling, that it's this trait, it's this innate capacity. But you talk to teachers who say, well, if I have a student who believes they can do it, I can teach them. They may not be excellent at it, but I can teach them to do it. And I've talked to psychokinesis teachers, remote viewing teachers, trance channeling teachers, and they all say this. But what's the difference between capacity versus ability versus skill? So perhaps everyone can channel, but maybe they might be excellent at one type versus another type. So I can absolutely take a basketball and dribble it down a court and shoot a basket, but I'm definitely not going to be a professional basketball player ever. So I think it probably manifests in these same ways. So I really love highlighting this whole unique, beautiful, honoring aspect of our human capacity to know beyond our traditional 5 senses. And, why not? Why not? We can use all the help we can get. Why not attempt to tap into these potential abilities and see how they can support us? So I very briefly, I know in my allotted time here, touched on these 4 questions. There's so much more that you can learn about on our website. And my recent book, The Science of Channeling, goes through all of this in a very accessible, general lay language way. And there's lots of ways on the website for you to tap into our IONS community and learn more. I'll also just share briefly that, Dr. Roll was interested in survival research, and I didn't get to talk about it today, but we have a number of projects on survival research as well that you can learn about on our website or email me so you can learn more. And of course, just deep gratitude to all the people who work with me to help make this possible. Thank you. I'm going to stop my sharing here.
Thank you so much for such an engaging and fascinating presentation. As you said yourself, we're now open for questions, questions from the Zoom and questions from the floor. So I can go and peep at any questions that come in. Do you want to type your questions into Zoom and we can relay them back to the room so we don't get mic into,
Interference.
Interference
Yes, there you
is the
go.
word, yeah.
That's
But,
it.
yeah, does anybody have a question that they would like to ask? Yes, Melissa.
I wondered what kind of channeling Elaine does.
Did you hear the question, Helané?
If you could repeat it, that would be wonderful.
What sort of channeling she does in her family?
Oh, what type of channeling I personally do?
Yes.
Yeah, so I am, like many, have a variety of different channeling experiences that I have. Like I mentioned during the talk, I think the goosebumps are my most commonly experienced channeling. I also get the downloads so that I just know it feeling. I'm also have the feeling through emotions. And more recently, I have learned, we have a colleague named Patricio Tresoldi who developed a hypnosis protocol to teach people how to trance channel. And when I saw that, I was pretty amazed and wanted to try it out, and I did. And so now if I choose to, I can trance channel.
And what was that called? Is that I mean the workshop did or the
Sorry, Patricio Tresoldi, Tressoldi. He is a prominent parapsychology researcher in Italy, and he has published that protocol. It's freely available to anyone. And it's essentially 6 sessions with a hypnotist that guides you through a process to learn how to trance channel.
Thank you.
Other questions, Dr. Wahbeh?
I'll ask a question. So you're suggesting that this is an innate ability and that it's a good thing. But what about boundaries on it? What about, if you're inviting too much in, like how do you distinguish between healthy and maybe overwhelming, less healthy experiences in your research?
Absolutely. I didn't cover it today, but we've done quite a bit of research looking at the mental health aspects of this, because often that's people's fear about not wanting to share it, is that there's a perception that they have a mental health condition. And we won't really get into all the taboos around that. But in general, most of the surveys that we've done, that others have done around the world, have demonstrated that people who have channeling experiences are healthy, well-adjusted, high-functioning people. That's generally what is found. They may have higher dissociative and psychotic symptoms compared to people who don't have channeling experiences, but they don't reach pathological levels. Now, all that being said, I have a whole chapter and presentations about this, about how do you actually discern when you potentially may need support. And a few high points or red flags, if you will, is if it's happening very often, if it's very intense, if there's negative emotions associated with them, and if it's blocking you from functioning in your daily life. And most of the impeccable teachers that I know who do this, teach what they call, energetic hygiene and emotional hygiene, and teach skills to set boundaries, to create protection, to, I talk about it in my book about having, your apertures either open or closed. So because I'm sensitive to emotions, if I'm going to a concert, I'll put on my energetic raincoat and kind of shut things down, because I don't want to be picking up on everyone's emotions and energy around me. So there is a practice, absolutely a practice, to cultivating doing this in a healthful and meaningful way.
Thank you so much. I think there was one question in the chat, but do we have got questions in the room too?
Yeah, you go right here. Yeah.
You implied that some people feel that they can see the future, which implies everything is written for our lives. Now, I've had experiences, as silly as it may sound, of when I'm coming out on a road, that a squirrel may be doing a little jig in front of my car, so I deliberately slow down, only to find out a half a mile down the road, if I hadn't slowed down, I would have hit something. Now, that on a spiritual level could all be calculated out as the timing of those deers coming towards the road to cross the road versus where I was on the road to where the distance. Now, to me, that's not seeing the future as much as the calculation of time and distance.
Right.
Do you have an input on that?
Sure. I mean, that's an incredible synchronicity, right? Which, is a bit in this realm of work, and a lot of people are studying that. I mean, we could sit here for at least a week, probably a month, talking about theories on the future and time and what is time and how does time work. I personally do not hold to the theory that the future is predestined and set in stone. I'm kind of more aligned with the camp that ascribes to probabilities, and that, being able to sense into the most probable future is likely, but that, often this comes up a lot, especially people who go see psychics and mediums, and, a psychic will tell them, oh, in 5 years, this is going to happen. And then their worldview completely shifts based on that information. Right. And then 5 years come along and they're like, oh, well, it didn't happen. But all of their choices and decisions shifted based on that piece of information. So anyway, I didn't really answer your question. I don't know the answer to your question, but I gave a little bit about thinking about it.
No, you actually did. You did skirt around the answer. So you actually did answer.
And then at the back. And then there's a border question on that, I think.
Thank you so much for that amazing information. I have a question regarding like when we hear voices, and I have a personal experience. I would have never called myself a channeler, but I got lost in a forest, and I thought that was the end of it, to be honest. I thought I was never going to be able to get out of it. It was a national forest. And I heard this voice clearly say, go to the right. And I went to the right. And luckily, if I had gone the other way, I finally kind of like found, it wasn't a path, it was kind of like an arroyo. It was a dry waterbed. So it was running. But if I had gone the other way, I would have gone deeper into the forest. So I went to where the voice told me. And luckily, many hours after, I was able to get out in that direction. And I share that experience with other people, and I've met people who've been in experiences similar where kind of like they would have lost their life, but they heard a voice and they were able to survive that situation.
Yes.
And just my question is like, what is this voice? Is it myself that I'm hearing, or I don't know, what is this voice that some people hear when we are in some?
Yes. I'll first say you're not alone. Like I mentioned in my talk, this is such a common experience, so deeply common. And, people want to know, our human mind wants to know, what is the source? What is the exact source of that? And at this point in time, my answer to that is I can't definitively tell you what exactly that source is. Is it you? Is it your higher self? Is it some spiritual guide? Is it your guardian angel? Is it, something else entirely? We don't know. And so my guidance, and what I feel like I'm a broken record saying this, but we're so focused on the source, and yet we can't answer that. So let's just you know, be excited and curious about it, but just set it aside for now. Set aside that question and focus on the message. What was the message? Was the message useful? Did it help you? Was it supportive? And focus more on the content and allow ourselves to be comfortable in the uncomfortableness of not knowing exactly what the source is. So that's one answer. The other answer is I would invite you to sit in meditation and sit quietly and to ask, what is that voice? You know, can I get information about what that voice is if it's really important to you? And then also invite you to just trust what a beautiful gift you were given by that voice that supported you to safety, like so many others.
Yeah.
Hey, can you hear me from back here?
Can you hear him okay?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just making sure. I know I'm very far away. I'm somewhat familiar with your work, and that telepathy and so on and so forth are supposedly caused by quantum entanglement. Can you speak as to how you think the particles become entangled from one person's mind to another?
Great question. You know, I'm not a physicist. I really love Jude Currivan. If you aren't familiar with her work, you might want to check her out. She's a cosmologist, and she's written the cosmic hologram that really ties together information from cosmology and quantum physics in a really beautiful way. But the way that she describes it, and that has helped me think about it, is if you envision that we were all connected at the point of the Big Bang, then everything is entangled. And there's even a study that MIT researchers did recently showing that light from quasars that were like billions of years old were entangled to a photon that they had in their laboratory, which is just mind-blowing. So that's one way that helps me kind of understand that a little bit better.
We've got just one question on Zoom, it looks like, or maybe a couple questions. So the first one from Naya, she says, does trance channeling basically mean being possessed? And yes, it's going to be posted on the website, Naya, thank you. Yeah.
So yes, in some traditions, what's called trance channeling, the way I've described it and how it's talked about in the West, is actually called spirit possession in other cultures. And there's other cultures that give it different names. But in the way that I'm speaking of it, it is a consensual act where the trance channeler is giving permission to this supposed non-physical being. And it is they do it as a working relationship per se. Now, what you might be thinking of is a negative possession where it's not consensual, where permission hasn't been given, where there's lots of negative side effects and such. And that's different than what I'm speaking to when I talk about trance channeling. But if you think about it, it's essentially a similar phenomenon in that it is believed that the physical body is being used as a vehicle for a non-physical being to communicate through.
One more in the chat from Daisy. She says, what could block a person from experiencing a channeling experience?
Great question. I'm going to answer that kind of in an opposite way, which is what supports channeling experiences. So belief, meditation. I have witnessed people who are committed to a personal growth path where they are continually clearing their personality and ego self, that really helps strengthen their channeling abilities. Cleansing your space, cleansing your body, having less clutter or static in your space, and then developing a practice. I'm not a proponent for any one type of practice. I'm all about people exploring their own personal path on what works best for them. But there's some common themes of, you know, finding a place of stillness, a place of quiet, even if it's a couple minutes a day, to just get into a clear, quiet, still space to help support your practice. And I just had this idea come to me of maybe you're thinking of like technology, like could we wear a helmet or clothing, or is it some sort of field that we can block in some way? And this is absolutely comes up for people who are afraid of psychic abilities like telepathy or psychokinesis. And I don't know of anything that has been tested that can do that. But if you talk to people in these circles, there's absolutely the idea that intention, that holding strong intentions of protection can create a barrier, if you will, to support yourself. So I hope I answered that.
And hello to Daisy. She's my student assistant.
We're not taking more questions.
What time is it? Do we have time for
8:07.
Anybody have a final question, perhaps? Another question at the back? Then we should maybe.
So typically particles are entangled in pairs. And I'm just wondering, like, do you think that there's a way for, instead of original entanglement, do you think there's a way for one particle to entangle with another at different points in time? Yes.
That's a great question. I don't see why not, you know, because if we think of time as this, you know, essentially human construct, I don't know, I'm not sure of the answer to that. You know, you could check out Julia Mossbridge's work, and there's another physicist,
Roger Penrose.
Penrose, and there's another group that just spoke at the Be All convention that were really fascinating talk about time. Maybe Dr. Simmons Moore, Dr. Glazier, remember who that is? I want to say Donald something.
It's completely not in my head at the moment, but it will probably come afterwards.
Okay.
But, yeah, there are people theorizing about these things, and luckily parapsychology is not just psychologists. It's philosophers and physicists and anthropologists and lots of people, sociologists, all working together. So there are some physicists. We can potentially put you in touch with one of the parapsychological physicists to ask that question. Yeah,
I would enjoy that.
All right. Well, yeah. Well,
all right. Well, thank you, Dr. Wahbeh. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So wonderful to be with you all. And I see someone's wondering about the website. It's noetic.org, noetic.org. That's the entry point to connect with me and get all the papers and projects and learn more. So thank you so much, everybody. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Before we leave, I want to thank Dr. Glazier for all of his work, all the Dr. Henry Smith for doing door prizes, fabulous EERL students for helping out with all the things, moving tables, collecting food,
Yes.
etc.
Good food.
Good food, yes. So thanks for coming.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate it. Thank you.
If anyone does want to get involved in any studies, please, email me or come and write your name down. We are planning lots of things, and as our speaker just said there, I was involved in another grant that was successful, and that is going to be looking it's next year. We're going to be doing lots of stuff, so come and join us in all the fun.
Yes. Good program. Thank you. I'm glad you liked that. Yeah.
Fun thing. If you do want to see more things like this, we are always open to donations to the fund that Dr. Glazier set up, and we can send out details about that.
Yeah, if you guys get on the Bill Roll website for UWG, there's instructions on if you want to make a donation on how to do that. So just Google Bill Roll UWG and it'll come right up. So thank you, everybody. We appreciate it.
Does the Department of Consciousness Studies?
Well, I'm ready to learn to chant.
Say,